It was Gaza. Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump in 2024 largely because of her position on Gaza, at least according to this Axios article we're going to talk about, which sheds light on a DNC autopsy about the 2024 election that the party is choosing to keep from the public. Now, the article explains that party officials held closed-door meetings with pro-Palestinian groups as part of their investigation into why they lost, and IMEU in particular told them that their complicity with the Palestinian genocide cost them support with Arab Americans as well as young people and progressives, and party officials confirmed this with them. A spokesperson for IMEU says the DNC shared with us that their own data also found that the policy was, in their words, a net negative in the 2024 election, and Axios verified that the party officials who conducted the autopsy did in fact conclude that the issue harmed the party's standing with some voters. Now, keep in mind that this is just another piece of evidence that points to Gaza being a major factor in Kamala Harris's defeat. A different autopsy on the 2024 election by Roots Action concludes that the Gaza effect was one of 5 main reasons why Harris lost the election, particularly because young voters as well as Arab American voters in key states like Michigan didn't want to come out and vote for her since she refused to break with Biden on his unconditional support for Israel. And to go back to the IMEU data that they presumably presented to the DNC, they found that nearly 30% of 2020 Biden voters in swing states who didn't vote for Harris in 2024 say that their number one issue was Gaza, and more than a third of them said that they would have voted for Harris if she promised to withhold weapons to Israel. So it's not surprising to see the DNC come to the same conclusion, because even without all of the data, it was pretty obvious. And it's an open secret in DC that she did indeed lose because of her position on Israel-Palestine, but they just don't want to admit that. But just to show you what I mean, a comms director for Omar and Ellison in Minnesota says when you talk to Democratic operatives in D.C. privately, every single one of them admits that Gaza is the reason Harris lost. It is universally believed, and nobody will talk about it publicly. It's why the DNC didn't publish its post-mortem. But it's not like they weren't warned, because Waleed Shahid adds, for over a year, I warned operatives, pollsters, and Biden-Harris staff that Gaza policy was costing us votes. I was told it wasn't in the numbers. After the election, some conceded it was a political calculation that shifting risked Harris looking too liberal to voters and donors. In the end, risk aversion and condescension masqueraded as wisdom. It cost lives, it cost trust, it may have cost an election. So the Democratic Party's base wanted a weapons embargo or for Harris to condition aid at a minimum, and she refused to listen, even though they couldn't have possibly been more clear, even though we all knew this was a possibility. And because she chose to not listen, she paid the price for it. The whole party paid the price for it. As a matter of fact, we're all paying the price for their unwillingness to listen. And this is not controversial to say. In fact, Kamala Harris even admitted such in her book. She called Biden's response to the genocide, quote, inadequate, and admits that Biden's perceived blank check to Netanyahu hurt her. The problem, however, is that she did nothing to distance herself from that terrible policy. In fact, she tethered herself to that sinking ship and repeatedly insisted that there was no daylight between her and Biden on the issue of Gaza. And here we are now, as a result, in a soft dictatorship with an absolute madman as president. And even though it's unclear if we're going to even have free and fair elections in the future, I do still think that it's important that we look back and learn from 2024 in the event democracy is restored one day. Because if Democrats make the same mistakes again and again and again, they're going to keep losing. And it's not like this is the first time that happened. Back in 1968, Humphrey waited too long to distance himself from Johnson's disastrous support for the Vietnam War, and that led to Nixon's victory. So if Democrats never learn obvious lessons from the past, they're going to keep emboldening right-wing conmen in future elections. Now, the good news is that Democrats are slowly but surely realizing that their unconditional support for Israel is politically untenable. Even Gavin Newsom is suddenly pretending to oppose AIPAC, even though he recently implied that Van Lathan was anti-Semitic for saying that he wouldn't vote for a candidate that took AIPAC money. Now, even though it's good to see them finally get the message, the bad news is that this is obviously a change in PR and not in policy. Furthermore, even if there was a policy change, you can't just pivot and pretend like you didn't just support a genocide. that's a permanent mark against you, and we won't forget that. And there needs to be a reckoning in the party, and their support for genocide has to be confronted head on, because as Ta-Nehisi Coates put it in 2024, we are at a moment right now where people are asking themselves, why can't the Democratic Party defend this assault on democracy? And I would submit to you that if you can't draw the line at genocide, you probably can't draw the line at democracy. And that's a really important point, and I haven't been able to get it out of my head since I heard him make it, because voters will never ever be able to look at the party the same way again after they supported a fucking genocide. And listen, supporting a genocide was bad in and of itself, but Democrats chose to keep supporting a genocide even though they knew it was a political liability when democracy itself was at stake. So the trust has been permanently broken because Democrats essentially chose to sacrifice democracy also they can keep supporting a genocide that's still very much ongoing to this day, contrary to popular belief. In fact, Israel is in the process of annexing the entire West Bank as we speak. So you can't just support a genocide and then move on and pretend like Biden and Harris didn't set the stage for what we're seeing right now. There needs to be real accountability. But instead of making meaningful changes, some Democrats are choosing to just hide their more unpopular positions from the public. For example, war with Iran looks imminent right now, seeing as how Donald Trump is deploying cargo ships and fighter jets to the region. But what's odd is that the Democratic Party, the supposed opposition, mind you, has been conspicuously silent, aside from a few exceptions here and there. But there's a reason for that. As Dropsite News reports, a foreign policy aide whom Dropsite agreed to not name explained that a substantial number of Senate Democrats believed Iran ultimately needed to be dealt with militarily. But those Democrats, the aide explained, also understood that going to war again in the Middle East would be a political catastrophe. That's precisely why they wanted Trump to be the one to do it. The hope was that Iran would take a blow and so would Trump, a win-win for Democrats. So this is why it feels like Democrats aren't doing enough to stop Donald Trump, because a sizable portion of them support what they're seeing. And this article refers to the Senate Democrats who are just quietly crossing their fingers and hoping that Trump invades Iran. But I don't want to make it seem like they're all keeping their mouths closed, since a lot of them actually are pretty open about their support for war with Iran.
You've seen this massive buildup in the Middle East, the president threatening to strike Iran. Would you support that?
I'd want to know what the president's goals are. I'd want to know what his objectives are. Look, we know the Iranians. These are the bad guys. These are the folks these are the people who are the largest exporter of terrorism around the globe. You will find no sympathy from me when it comes to the Iranians.
I think it's appropriate that the president has all the options on the table.
Why? How could you allow Iran to acquire a nuclear bomb? Now, people have always said that. Well, you know, he actually did something to actually prevent Iran from doing that. If they have 900 pounds of near weapons grade uranium, why wouldn't you strike that? Why wouldn't you hold them accountable that way? And now here we are again, and now we've demonstrated that's the only thing Iran ever responds to is strength and power, and hit them. And if they want to hit them again, because I don't think you can't really trust and negotiate with them. You can't negotiate with cancer. You have to attack it and go right at it with superior force.
I mean, with Democrats like these, who needs Republicans, right? And let's not forget that the leader of the Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer, attacked Donald Trump last year for being too soft on Iran before he later bombed Iran. So I guess Trump proved to him that he's not soft on Iran. He's not Taco Trump after all, and he's about to do it again. And Schumer is quiet. The point is that most Democrats, they support war with Iran, hence why they're remaining silent. And this demonstrates why there's a trust issue with the base, because they're fucking disingenuous. Rather than changing policy, they're choosing to just hide their more unpopular policies from the base. And this duplicity is why they keep losing elections, because they keep their base in a perpetual state of disappointment, cycle after cycle after cycle. And it's not a coincidence that the same Democrats supporting war with Iran were loudly cheering on the genocide in Gaza, because Israel desperately wants to goad the United States into war with Iran, since that's what they want. So the policy supported by the Democrats is a reflection of the money that they're taking from AIPAC, from defense contractors, and other interests that oppose what the voters want. But all of this begs the question, you know, if Democrats' silence on Iran is a sign of their tacit approval, is the same true for Venezuela? Is it true for Cuba? I mean, not many Democrats condemned Trump's kidnapping of Maduro. A lot of them, you know, they feigned concern about him not getting congressional approval, but their opposition hinged on the way he attacked Venezuela and not the fact that he did it in the first place, which is bad. Now, with regard to Cuba, Trump is currently strangling them with an oil blockade that's creating a full-blown humanitarian disaster, and most Democrats are responding to that manufactured crisis by saying nothing. See the problem? It's one of the reasons why Democratic Party voters in a New York Times focus group described the party as spineless, complacent, paralyzed, afraid, and incompetent, while others said that they've given up or sold out, which is all true. And it's why it's so important to relitigate the 2024 election, especially with regard to Gaza, because more and more voters are starting to see that it's not just that Democrats are weak, it's that they're fascist collaborators, full stop. It goes back to the quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates. If they won't draw the line at genocide, how can we expect them to draw the line anywhere else? The trust has been permanently broken. And even if the party apparatus refuses to address this, the good news is that voters are more aware of the game that they're playing. Case in point, people in the politics subreddit, which is typically pretty pro-Democrat, had some really encouraging takeaways about the Axios report that we're talking about today. One person says, as easy as it is to bag on voters who didn't show up, at some point you have to hold the DNC accountable. If Trump was really the catastrophic threat to our democracy like they ran on, which he is, why didn't the DNC course correct? Why was their pitch to the American people the status quo, which was not polling well? It screams entitlement and incompetence. We should have much higher expectations of those wanting to be voted in and to lead than our voters. Schrodinger's leftist, so important that a small amount of them can sway an entire election, but so unimportant that their vote shouldn't be campaigned for. Exactly. Another person adds, you can't lecture people about civility and morality and then unquestionably back a genocide. I can imagine a younger, more idealistic version of me voting third party or staying home in 2024. Not saying it was right, Gaza is in worse shape because Harris lost, but I understand the impulse to vomit in one's own mouth at the thought of voting for these hypocrites. But to add insult to injury, the party is refusing to release their post-mortem that confirms what we already know because they think that that's going to be some distraction from the Democratic Party's recent wins. But as many people are starting to realize, they're winning because people dislike Trump, not because they love Democrats. In fact, they still very much dislike Democrats, and that dynamic is bound to flip in the next several elections if Democrats refuse to change a thing. But I mean, if you expect them to change, don't hold your breath because they're not going to change. They would have already done so if they were planning on it. The only way to get a Democratic Party that vociferously opposes fascism is to purge the party of its fascist collaborators. That is what you do. It starts with the primaries. Florida's 23rd congressional district is currently being represented by Jared Moskowitz, a genocide-supporting fascist collaborator who's fighting the movement to abolish ICE. He even voted to censure Al Green for standing up to Donald Trump at last year's State of the Union. The good news is that he's being primaried by Oliver Larkin, who wants to abolish ICE and opposes genocide. Now, in the Michigan primary for the U.S. Senate, Abdul El-Sayed is a medical doctor who supports Medicare for all and opposes genocide, whereas his opponents don't share those same views, and they just represent the status quo, albeit to lesser degrees, to be fair. But in the 9th District of Illinois, Kat Abu-Ghazala literally put her ass on the line and got assaulted for resisting ICE and is now being sued by the Trump administration for impeding ICE. So she's obviously in favor of abolishing ICE, but she also supports all of the policies that would make Democrats more electable, such as Medicare for all and a weapons embargo on Israel. These are the kinds of Democrats that you have to vote for if you actually want to stop fascism. And there are dozens of others just like them, which are often highlighted by the Secular Lefty YouTube channel, which I'll encourage you to subscribe to again. But even if you're more moderate and you don't agree with progressives, still, you have a reason to vote for the most progressive candidate in every single primary if you want to stop fascism, because progressives have proven time and again that they're the only ones in the party willing to fight Donald Trump, because there's no question about whether or not they oppose what he's doing. They oppose the entirety of his agenda. And one last thing that I'll say is that I'm not trying to create a false equivalence between Democrats and Republicans, because both parties are not the same. Even on the issue of Gaza. In fact, Trump's ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, just created an international shitstorm in an interview with Tucker Carlson for saying that he'd be cool with Israel just taking over the entire Middle East. So, my goal here in criticizing Democrats isn't to obscure the differences between both parties. It's to make the Democrats a better party so they can beat Republicans in every single election. Because if 2024 taught us anything, it's that simply being less bad than Republicans is not a winning strategy. You have to give people something to vote for and not bank on them coming out to vote for you because they're voting against something. And no, berating voters election after election isn't going to move the needle either. If you want things to get better, you have to demand more from the people with power. And if they refuse to listen, then you need to vote for better candidates in the Democratic Party primaries. And if you keep voting for the same tired-ass centrist do-nothing Democrats in primaries when there's usually a viable alternative who's progressive, you shouldn't complain because you're getting exactly what you're voting for.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Tree? Tree?
They not like us.
Tree?
Round and round.
Tree? You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?